Councillor Rivera. Councillor Villarreal.
Present.
Councillor Romero Worth.
I am here.
And Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Terrific. Hold on. PrimeGov is downloaded. Here we go. Are there changes to the agenda from staff?
No, Madam Chair.
Changes from the committee? Is there a motion?
To approve.
Motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? Motion passes. Is that me?
Sorry.
Oh. We are on to approval of the consent agenda. There are some items I think the committee would like to hear. Councillor Lindell, did you want to start?
Yeah, I'm just getting online here, but I'll go from the text that I gave you earlier today.
I think it was P. Yeah,
P, yes, PUV.
P, U, and V. Other items, I think we have. Hold on, and I think we're gonna pull A under discussion, but that's already there, yeah? Yeah, okay. Anything else from the committee?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Mine was more about process, I guess, with the multiple things on our agenda, and I was hoping maybe Miss Oster and Miss McDonald and probably Mr. Burnett can help kind of clarify some of that so that we don't have to ask or pull multiple items off. Would that be?
Yeah, so I was trying to figure out how to do that. I think Councilor Lindell pulled in the categories, right? So that the questions could be asked, but if we approve the consent agenda, we'll be approving some of the items. I think we're going to get the answers that we want to hear, but so I don't think there's an issue, but I don't know what's the comfort level with the committee.
Not an issue with the individual items, but again, just with the process. So we'll leave it as it is and I'll try to get my questions.
Yeah,
asked.
and I think staff is prepared to discuss the process and help us understand why the contracts look differently and why they're actually not lumped together, but individual items. So I think we can get, I think they are prepared to answer your questions.
Thank you.
All right, with that, can we get a motion?
To approve is amended.
Second.
All right, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, that motion passes. So we'll go to our presentation, which is from Director Oster about the audit for FY21 and an update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am pleased to report that the audit continues to progress. As I reported last week, we've signed the engagement letters for both fiscal years 21 and 22, turned over the trial balance. We are having a lot of back and forth communication at this time with the auditors, working through the second big list of PBC items. Earlier today, we did an internal control walkthrough with payroll. Things are progressing normally. We're moving ahead and happy to report that we are making progress on completing the FY21 and FY22 audits. I am also happy to report that we have 2 new employees that started this pay period. Both are from the state, so we're happy to have more folks coming into the ranks of finance. In budget, as a senior budget analyst, we have Janelle Chavez, and that brings us up to budget being fully staffed for the first time in a number of years, which is great timing going into the busy budget prep season for FY24. And then we also have our new Chief Procurement Officer, Travis Dutton-Leda, who started today in purchasing. So we're very excited to have Travis on board. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our consent items that were pulled. And I don't know, Counselor Lindell, do you want to take them one by one? Do you want to talk about process overarching? How do you want to go about this?
We can talk about process overarching. I think that, we'll try to make this quick and I think it is about process and just getting clarity. It's not specific to any one of these contracts, really. The question can I go ahead and just
Sure.
so a good example of this for me was in item P, page 29, which was from the purchasing office, and it gave the bids from Santa Fe Curb Appeal, Franco's Trees, and Cassidy's. Now, the reason that my eye went to this was Santa Fe Curb Appeal. I mean, let's just look at the first one, mowing, hand mower, item number 1. Santa Fe Curb Appeal is $130. Cassidy's Landscaping is $35. There's just too big a discrepancy there for me to think that we're talking about the same thing. So, and there's a lot of discrepancy on some of these. Some of these are much, much more expensive than others. And so why don't you give us an overview of how this is going to work? And I suspect that it's part of the process for Parks and Rec also. And if it isn't, then you can tell us.
So, and if I can just jump in, Counselor, would it be better, Director Oster, to talk generically about how this process works and then get into the specifics of these particular things? I'm just wondering if we need some overarching foundation, which is, and I don't know who best,
Certainly, Madam
Okay.
Chair, I can start it off and then, we can all try to give you a sense of how the process works. When we conduct a competitive solicitation for general services or goods, we use a procurement vehicle called an invitation to bid. And we put that out and we have our specifications included. And those are generally very detailed. It's different than something like an RFP for professional services, where there's more variation in what the offerer can provide. With an invitation to bid, it's for very specific services or very specific goods. And then people come back and say, okay, we can do it for this price. And different vendors may have different prices, and that's up to them. They propose what their cost is for that particular good or service. And then we can either select the lowest priced vendor and award one contract to them, or we can choose to make a multiple award, which is what we've done here. And there are actually a couple of different ITBs. There are agreements associated with a couple of different ITBs on the agenda.
ITB being,
Invitation to bid.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Sorry, Counselor. Invitation to bid. So that's why you may see the same vendor appearing multiple times. That means they bid on several different procurements. So what happens with a multiple award is that we want to make sure that we have access to these services when we need them. And, these are things that we need to have available on short notice for emergencies or urgent needs. And so we're not just wanting to award a single contract to the lowest priced vendor. We want to have multiple options available so that if we have a need, for example, for electrical services or for a landscape need, and the vendor that was the lowest priced isn't available, we want to be able to call someone else and say, hey, can you do it? And of course, we're going to always try to select the lowest priced vendor, but sometimes they're not available or they can't provide the service. So that gives a little bit of an overview of how the process works. So the reason that we would do it this way, where we would award multiple on-call contracts off of one solicitation like this, is to give us more flexibility and give us options, and really to ensure that there aren't any delays associated with procurement when the needs for these services arise. So we want to make sure that the procurement piece is already done. And then when we have a specific project that we need done, we'll enter into a purchase order with that vendor for that particular task or project that we're asking them to perform. With that, I'll turn it over
Okay,
to-
and then just one other thing. If, and this is for the committee, if we're going to talk about the particulars of the proposals, we run into this confidentiality issue, which has come up occasionally, where if you want to do that, we would have to go into an executive session because the details of the proposals aren't public until after final approval. Under this, that's true of our RFP process, but I believe it's also true of this invitation to bid process.
Yes, Madam Chair, the procurement files are confidential until the process is complete when the contracts are signed.
So asking about particular proposals and what they bid, we would need to go into executive session, I think.
Madam Chair, Director Oster, for clarification, anything included in your packet tonight, including the bid tabs, so the actual dollars amount that the various vendors bid, the name of the vendors, and all of that is available for discussion tonight. So an RFP and an ITB, the confidentiality rules are a little different, and anything that you have in your packet is absolutely open for discussion.
That's not what I'm being told. So we have a bit of a problem here. I don't know. I guess the question is, does that general explanation of the process answer your questions, or would you like to get into the specifics of the different vendors, what they bid for the services that we're requesting? And do you want to go into executive session? Councilor Wendell.
Well, I've had enough interaction today with staff that I feel like I have a good understanding of this at this point in time. I just thought that making sure the public had a good understanding of it was also important. You know, we have staff here that we trust to treat the fiduciary duty of this in a serious manner, and to always try to get the most traction for the city with the dollars that we spend. So I'm satisfied, but you know, I earlier today talked to both Mr. Burnett and Ms. McDonald. So I was pretty clear when I came in. And I think that in saying that the explanation they gave me and having worked with them, I completely trust them to follow this through in a way that gets the city the absolute most for the most amount of return for the dollars that we spend. So I'm willing to just continue on, and I don't have any reason to go to executive session, and the explanation that Ms. Oster gave is fine for me.
Okay. And just, I guess to be clear, Ms. Oster, the varying price differentials, the way those are handled is we would go to the person who could provide the services at the lowest cost. And we might go to somebody else who we have the ability, who we are to a different vendor under this multi-award if the first vendor who's had a lower price wasn't available and it was time critical and we needed to go up to the next person on the list.
Madam Chair, that's correct. And directors from the other divisions can probably give you some specific examples or talk about how that might play out. But the reason that we do a multiple award like this is to give us flexibility. So if we're having an electrical emergency at a building and the electrician who bid the lowest cost isn't available, we don't want to have to go through a whole nother procurement process. We need to have someone else that we can go to. So these on-call contracts they're like a placeholder to ensure that the procurement process has already been done. And when we need to enter into a purchase order for these services, we have the procurement process already ready to go. We've already done that, and we can just go ahead straight to the PO stage and let the vendor start doing the work. But as far as Director Burnett or Director McDonald probably can give you more examples of why we might go to a different vendor other than the one that bid the lowest cost.
Right. And so if we can keep this at a high level and speak generically without specifics at the moment, that would be helpful.
Madam Chair, Councilors, I can assure you that we seek the most competitive price. In Park's case, we might have several functions that we're needing to address or several items that we're needing to address. So it isn't always one item. So we do go out for competitive quotes between these on-call contractors. So there is another layer of competitiveness within these quotes. Because there are some slight variations in terms of hours that somebody might take to do things, that type of thing. So we find it to be a very helpful mechanism, both in emergencies and then sometimes in jobs that are more ongoing that we have to deal with.
And Mr. Burnett, did you want to add to that in a generic way?
Absolutely. Council Chair, councilors, in addition to that, when we're doing these ITBs and we decide to make multiple awards, there are often vendors who in certain portions of the bid itself come in higher. We're unlikely to use them for those types of services, but they've proven to be competitive or even more affordable than other vendors in other areas. And so it gives us the ability to be a little more dynamic in how we're accomplishing work and doing so, in a financially responsible manner.
Committee questions around this? Anybody want to go into executive session?
I think I agree with Mr. Burnett. I think all the information is here, the amounts that they bid. So we're not disclosing anything that hasn't been part of the public record that we're looking at right now. So
I know, except I'm being told that perhaps that shouldn't have happened and we're checking. So I'm just being safe and not wanting to get into the details since we don't have as we double check, we don't have a clear. Okay, I'm being given the thumbs up. So we can discuss these? Okay. All right. So I guess we can discuss the details now, and we don't have to go into executive session. So Councilor Rivera, and we can come back to you, Councilor Lindell, if there were specific things you wanted to ask about.
I think this is confusing, and I think it would have helped if we would have put the bid number maybe on the agenda, so you know which bids are tied to which whoever did it, whether it was Sam or Mr. Bullman or Miss McDonald, but you could see which bids were tied into which whatever that is for the invitation to bid. Yeah. So we could see at least which ones were tied to which invitation to bid. But in the case of item P, where you're looking at what Councilwoman Adele brought up is why would we do, and I know all the prices are different, but like for mowing, why wouldn't we just set it up so that we accept the lowest price? Because other departments, it's my understanding, Kid, also piggyback off these agreements and be able to use them. So why, clearly it would be up to them whether they wanted to pay the larger amount for the mowing, for example. Why would we even allow that to be part of it, of what they would be allowed to choose?
Yeah, Chairperson, Romero Worth and Councilor Rivera can definitely answer that. We would definitely go to the person who bid the lowest, but like Emily was explaining, availability with contractors, it's really hard sometimes. I don't know if you've dealt with them, they're not really the most reliable when you want stuff done right away. So being able to go to the next person up would be the best choice. And having that procurement method ready to go would be the best. In terms of what we have here in my individual one, I did talk to Curb Appeal after they bid and asked why their prices were so high. He's a relatively small company and he's really new with the city, really new. So this is his first time bidding on a government entity contract. Therefore, he bid for his whole crew to get the work done. So that's why he bid 130, 140 an hour for those type of positions. He wasn't aware is per person per hour. So when we go to PO, it'll actually be a lot less on paper. But he is also very competitive. That's why we decided to keep him on a lot of the wage rates down below. You see he's a like superintendent and journeyman, all super competitive with the rest.
All right, and I think some of the confusion was that in the past, we would just do a general services contract with multiple landscaping companies to provide services for the city. And then you could go to this one document, let's say P, they would all be listed on there and that would be what you work off of. Now we're looking at 3 different really agreements with 3 different groups for really what could easily be looked at as on one, I guess. And since you were both looking at landscaping services, did you work together to make sure that, I mean, have we looked at both agreements to see like if mowing, I assume mowing is on Miss McDonald's as well. So are all the prices the same throughout?
Chair, Counselor, in this particular case, the difference between, there is a distinct difference between parks and facilities. So the facilities division, the landscape services that we're asking for are much more basic. Often will attract a different set of vendors, not always, but often will attract a different set of vendors than what the parks team would be looking, the types of vendors or services the parks team would be looking for. We have talked, Director McDonald and her team did share their ITB with me. And so we have had communication back and forth, but because of the difference in the focus of the services we're looking for, we ended up each doing our own ITB for landscape services, if that makes sense.
A little bit. So in the instances of mowing for either hand or riding, are the price or the invitations, are the responses the same on both IVBs, ITBs?
It just doesn't
Madam
roll off
Chair,
like RFP. It's.
It took me a while to get the ITB myself. Madam Chair, Councilors, no, we did not look at each other's ITBs and compare prices, if that's what you're asking. I think that an important thing to note, though, is that we might have more complexity. So a number of items on our list that we are contracting for. So it would be strange to say we're going to hire one company to mow and one company to fix the irrigation and buy a new clock. So that's why we put them on ours, because, we're looking at having somebody come in and fix everything in one stop. So while there is overlap, and ours tends to be a little bit more specialty oriented because we have higher needs in terms of types of landscapes, a diversity of landscapes. We were really, our RFP is much broader, and it looks at classifications, certifications, things like this in landscaping, not just what theirs were calling for. So in a lot of ways, it seems like duplicate, but when you're actually putting out a job, it would be strange to go to two different companies to try to do that, two different contracts to do that all the time. So that's part of it.
So on mowing, let's say a hand mower, if Santa Fe Curb Appeal responded to your invitation to bid with a much lower price than what Sam got, why wouldn't he use yours?
If I, Madam Chair, counselors, if they were both replying to the same ITB, I could choose. If I only had mowing to do and I had the two contracts, I would choose the lowest one. Because once you have the contract, anyone can use any of the contracts. So I would have access to any of these contracts and I can pick the lowest price. So if it was just hand mowing and they were the lowest, I would go to the lowest one available, whether it be my contract or facilities contract.
That's
Where
the
it gets a
same.
little bit more competitive and overlapping is when you have numerous things that have to happen in a job. And in that case, you want to ask folks in a different way, a lot of it. So do you understand?
No, but that's okay. So I talked to Miss Oster earlier trying to figure some of this out, and it looks like we're almost into the situation where we're doing our own CES or state price agreement. It's almost like we're setting up our own price agreements here, and anyone can piggyback off either invitation to bid from whatever they need. I mean, is that what we're trying to do here? Are we at that stage where we're going to get into that process?
And Madam Chair and Councilors, I'll also let Mr. Director Burnett answer this as well. But in our case, there's a number of services that the state pricing agreement doesn't offer. So this allows us to be very targeted in what we're looking for. So for example, homeless encampment cleanup, like we have very specific requirements because of our way that we look at homelessness in the city. And so we have specific types of ways that we deal with homelessness. When I went to look on the state pricing agreement for encampment cleanup, I had to piecemeal it, and it often doesn't come out in the city's favor. So yes, we are, whenever we look at a vehicle for procurement, we're looking at the best possible outcome for what we're trying to achieve. And in this case, there were a number of things that were important. So for example, tree pruning, we just had big winds the other day and we had a lot of trees come down. Well, that's the type of thing that we need to have a company that can respond quickly, like within 24 hours. So all of these contractors have to, get back to us very quickly so that we can decide if we want to contract with them. And they also often have to be specialized. So the state pricing agreement didn't really have what we needed for a lot of this. So while we were already going through the process to accomplish these very specialized services, we included other services because again, it's a lot more effort to bring in multiple contracts when we could do it in one little piece. So if I had a tree fall down and it needed to have a bench replaced and we needed to mow off some things, that's like 3 activities that have to happen in one place. The landscape contracting or general contracting may or may not be covered by a landscape company that the state pricing agreement has. So it just gives us more options so that we can get the best price for our citizens.
And these are specialty items for you as well, Mr. Burnett?
I'm sorry, sir?
Mr. Burnett.
Oh, yes.
Chair, Counselor, many of the specialty items that the Parks team have included on their ITBs are not really relevant. often not relevant to the work that the facilities division does. Our landscaping services are considerably more basic. They're really primarily born out of needs at Midtown campus and from time to time, other city facilities when special needs arise. But for the most part, our work is considerably different than the work of the parks team.
If there was, since you're both looking at specialty stuff, if there was another city department that wanted something done that didn't fit on either one of these invitations to bid, they'd have to do their own.
Madam Chair, Councilors, no, they don't have to do their own because since we have these, they can come to us and say, hey, we need irrigation repaired at the municipal court and we need help with this. Do you have a contract that you can use? And then they would be able to use it. So they would, because it's a contract, it's just a vehicle, it's not associated with a specific budget, they could use our contract. So it kind of removes that one RFP step because it's giving us the lockdown prices. And then they can look at all the prices and pick the best company for their services and their needs.
Yeah, my question was if they had something specific, a specific need that they had that didn't fit your invitation to bid, they would have to do their own.
Madam Chair, Councilors, they would need to pick a way of contracting it. It may not be this way. There's plenty of other ways. They could do CES, they could do state pricing, they could do a direct contract, they could do an under $20,000 contract, an under $60,000 contract, and over $60,000 contract. So there's a lot of different options. Part of why we made ours broad is that it does allow for somebody who has just a very specialty need not have to go through that because we have the contract that they can utilize. So it's actually a huge time saver for other departments that don't regularly have to do these services. They can come to us and say, hey, I need this done. Do you have a contract that we could utilize? And then we give them these.
Chair, Counselor, I would also like to say that while we do our best to be as inclusive as possible in these processes to help us, kind of execute or accomplish the tasks we need to in a timely manner, there are always outlying projects that don't fit inside of one of the on-call contracts we've created. And in that case, whoever that individual inside of the city may be, as Director McDonald pointed out, they'll have to go through some type of procurement process to execute that particular project. These are not, these are not perfect. That situation may still arise, but we do our best to be inclusive as possible.
And Ms. Oster, is this the way we're going to start seeing all these invitations to bid, I guess? So you have like asphalt repair for many city departments, wastewater, water, different groups, and maybe they want to do the same thing. Are we going to look at all these separately?
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, my understanding is that, yes, the city has decided that we want to list these out separately so that each vendor appears separately on the agenda. I believe that's a change from how it's been done in the past. And that is my understanding going forward, that we wanted to provide that level of detail.
All right. And again, my recommendation would be that we put the bid number associated with each one so we know that they're all part of that same invitation to bid process that went through it. That would have helped me a lot. I don't know if it would have helped anybody else, but thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Lindell, did you want to dive in on this? Or are you good? Because now that we know, we can get into the specifics. I didn't know if. Sorry to put you on the spot. Other questions from the committee too?
So this is hold item P, correct?
EU and V.
All at once?
Well, we can go
I mean, I'm ready.
contract by contract.
I'm ready to make a motion to approve and
I think we have to do them individually. Yeah.
item P, move to approve.
Is there a second? Second. Is there further discussion? Can we get a roll call, please, on item P?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Item passes.
All right, and then we'll go to item U and we can discuss more here or get a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion and a second to approve item U. Further discussion? If not, can we get a roll call, please?
Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, item V. Is there a motion?
Move to approve. Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? If not, can we get a roll call, please?
Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. We are done with our consent agenda. We will move now to action items. We are discussing consideration of a resolution sponsored by myself, Councilwoman Villarreal, Councilor Chavez, Councilor Rivera, Councilor Cassett, Councilor Michael Garcia, and Mayor Weber. A resolution directing the city manager to take next steps based on some of the recommendations of the chart report. We have the city attorney with us as staff to this item. And we do have an amendment that I would like to offer from the sponsors, from the original 4 sponsors. And I guess the question is, how would the committee like to proceed? It is Amendment A. And I'm happy to walk through that. And maybe we should just start there. And then we can go to questions from the committee more generally. Councilor Lindell, I think this is the first time you've sat on a committee where this has been, and you may have questions. And there may be additional questions from other members of the committee as well. So why don't let's do consideration of Amendment A, and maybe what's the pleasure of the committee? Should we just do we want a motion, or do we want to walk through? Okay, let's walk through it. All right. So there's a series of things this amendment does. On page 1, line 11. So that has to do with the caption. We are adding, let's see, after the word on. So it says directing the city manager to take next steps based on, we would insert and inspired by some of the recommendations of the chart report. So it would say that we're directing the city manager to take next steps based on some of the recommendations of the chart report and inspired by the recommendations of the chart report. I think this is to be clear, if it wasn't clear already, that everything in this resolution was not dictated specifically by the chart report. I think the sponsors the initial sponsors in meetings after the chart report came out, through discussions and through just, our knowledge of what's happening in the community and what the chart report said, came up with what's in this resolution. And it by no means is dictated entirely by the chart report. Some of it came from conversations from a whole bunch of things, the chart report, emails we receive, interactions we've had with the community, our own sense of where things are and how we think it's best to move forward. And this amendment is really to make clear that the chart report did not dictate the specifics to the T of what's in this. So that's that item. We can, and I don't know, how do you, should I walk through all of them and then we'll talk about them, or do you want to talk about each one? On page 6, line 21. This is the part where we say, this is the first now, therefore be it resolved clause. We say, while engaging in voluntary conversations with SHPO, the city manager shall hire conservators, designers, and/or historians to determine specific proposals to mend, redesign, and/or reframe the obelisk. Then there's a parenthetical, the obelisk proposals as follows. So what we're in the second amendment here, what we're saying is that we will hire these people to determine specific proposals to mend, redesign, and/or reframe the obelisk, maintaining the general shape as it had prior to its destruction. And this came about because I think people want to know, you know, are we envisioning, is it going to go up exactly the way it was? How much liberty is there to change what the obelisk look like? And what we're saying here is it should be the general shape of the obelisk prior to its destruction. So we're trying to be clear about what we envisioned. So I'll leave that there, I guess. The next one on page 7, lines 7 and 10, 7 through 10, this is the be it further resolved clause that says that we would have directed that the box be removed and the fence taken down, and that the extent permitted under the city code, the installation of temporary lighting would be shining into the sky. We are deleting that section, that requirement, that direction. So there will be no light shining into the sky. In its place, however, we are directing that the city manager conduct a risk assessment and threat analysis for each actionable step taken concerning the obelisk, and take appropriate steps to address and reduce identified risks and threats. So again, I think this addition suggests that we want to make sure that the obelisk is protected as we move forward in, what are the words? Mending, redesigning, and reframing. All right, the next one. On page 7, line 13. When we ask in the be it further resolved that upon receiving the obelisk proposals and after conversations with SHPO regarding the obelisk proposals, the city manager shall report back, and what we're inserting here is a timeline, 1 year from the date the governing body adopts the FY24 budget. And that would require, line 13, that the city manager report back to the governing body 1 year from the adoption of the FY24 budget to obtain approval for the design that is most appropriate for the ongoing use of the plaza as a community park. So in this amendment, we are setting a timeline of 1 year after the adoption of the FY 24 budget. And then on let's see, the next one on line 7, after line 17, we are also directing that the city manager begin necessary work with the Human Resources Department to stand up the Office of Equity and Inclusion. And I think what's being contemplated here is, given the timeframe of 1 year to bring back proposals for consideration by the governing body to approve the design of the obelisk, we recognize that we need to get started as soon as possible, standing up the Office of Equity and Inclusion, because one of their first tasks will be working to get the language for the different plaques on the obelisks drafted. And with that in mind, we'll have to be thinking about writing the position, what's the job description of the people that will first be hired by the Office of Equity and Inclusion. Those are things the Human Resources Department should begin working on as soon as possible, after they know that we're going to actually create this Office of Equity and Inclusion. And then finally, on page 8, line 16, let's see, sorry, page 8, line 16. We have said that among its first tasks, the Office of Equity and Inclusion is supposed to recommend language for at least 4 new plaques to surround the obelisk, to demonstrate broader perspectives and a more complete representation of the community's complex multicultural history. What we are inserting here is language that says that, it would be after language. So it would say, among its first tasks, recommend language after consulting with interested stakeholders for at least 4 new plaques to surround the obelisk. So here, what we're directing is that the obelisk, the language would not be done in a vacuum, in a silo by the people who are hired to be the Office of Equity and Inclusion, but that they will reach out to the interested stakeholders to consult with them around how in developing the language for those 4 plaques. So again, they wouldn't do that in isolation, but with consultation with the interested stakeholders. So again, this process continues. So those are the amendments from the original 4 sponsors. They do a variety of things, and we can discuss those, or we can discuss the resolution as a whole, whatever the pleasure of the committee. I am told that there is a red line, so if you refresh PrimeGov, there should be, I'm going back, there should be a red line that helps you see the amendments that I just spoke about. I don't see it yet, but I need to refresh. And again, we do have Erin McSherry here if there are particular questions for the city attorney's office.
Madam Chair, members, I was able to pull it up just now, so it should be able to be, okay.
Okay,
Sees it? Great.
great. I see it too. So if the public is following along here, if you refresh your PrimeGov, there is a red line that walks through the amendment that I've just spoken about. Questions from the committee? Councilor Lindell.
Thank you. Let me start by saying I very much respect the work that, the four counselors did that worked on this. I know it was a lot of work, and I really very much respect that you took this on. Wasn't easy, and, I know it was a lot of work, and it's a very, very steep climb. So with the comments that I have, and I just don't want them to be in any way interpreted that I'm not appreciative and respectful of the effort that went into this. I am. However, for numerous reasons, I probably can't support it. I think that it would have been, in my mind, this resolution covers two things. It covers the obelisk on the plaza, and it also covers creating a new department in the city. And we can't pick and choose out of the resolution what we like and what we don't like. But the two of them together probably makes it so that I can't support this. I can go through, why don't I go through some parts of this and just talk about it some. Creating a whole new department is the part of this that I really can't support. I think it's, I spent a lot of time going through the Albuquerque website on their Office of Equity and Inclusion. They have 11 employees, and I read all the reports and papers, and I'm not really sure how it changed the city or the value that they got for 11 employees of doing that work. I think that one of the things that concerns me with this is that a lot of this is about training and inward, outward looking. I don't know if the intent is that this office will do the training, or if they're qualified to do the training along with all the other things that we're talking about here, or if they will be hiring consultants to do the training. We've had some training. The council's had some training. Some of it's been good and some of it's been frankly a waste of time. For me, I'm only speaking for myself. Maybe others thought it was terrific. On page 7, lines 11 through 14, I think that it's an admirable 1 year once the 24 budget is passed. Is it realistic? I really don't know that it's realistic to think that that office gets formed, that the first work that they're being asked to do is the 4 plaques, and then later on in the amendment, which I don't have a printed red line, so it's a little, if I'm confusing this, let me know. To go out and work with interested stakeholders. I just don't know that it's realistic to think that getting the language for 4 plaques and dealing with interested stakeholders, forming the office, And trying to do all of that within 1 year is, I don't know that that's a very realistic task, and I'm usually someone that's trying to shorten the time frame, but that one might be pretty well shortened. I don't know what it means also interested stakeholders. I mean, is this the start of a new public process? That's a pretty tall undertaking to try to form a whole new department and have them in such a, I mean, this is a super divisive issue. I don't think anybody denies that. We have people that want the obelisk returned to the plaza exactly the way it looked before. We have people that want the obelisk put back together somewhere else. We have people that want a fountain on the plaza. We have people that want nothing on the plaza. They want a bigger dance floor. The idea of coming to consensus on 4 plaques with interested stakeholders within a year, I think is not very realistic. The budget on page 7, line 15 through 17. I don't agree with the budget. I don't know why we need to have an entire new department with this. I think that it's spending an awful lot of money. And one of the main problems for me is that it's very, very open-ended and aspirational. And we don't have anything here that would talk about how that would be evaluated. What's doing a good job look like as compared to not doing a good job? How does that area get evaluated? This is so aspirational. We're trying to be all things to all people and no call for review of how to determine how effective this group would be. On page 8, number 3, that's where I think, I really think that what this is that this office will need more money than what's in the FIR because they will be hiring consultants to do the trainings. Number 4, work toward having a workforce broadly reflective of the community. I don't know exactly what this means. I think that it needs more clarity. And number 5 troubles me. Providing equity lens and oversight to other departments' initiatives, including but not limited to requiring equity reports. I don't know that I've ever read a report like that. I think that this is very bureaucratic and I think it's very costly. And I think it's really burdensome on existing departments. 6, again, collaborate with community partners, building education and outreach opportunities. I think we're back to using consultants and that this department can't possibly do all of these things without having a fair amount of consultants. That takes us down to number 9, where we talked about with this new amendment, interested stakeholders. I don't know how that happens in a year, considering where we are right now. And on page 9, we keep referring back to Culture Connects. And I think Culture Connects was done in 2014. So it's almost 10 years old. I think it's time for us to review that rather than using that as a document that's just static and that we just keep referring to and referring to. I think that it needs to be reviewed and probably revised and updated. Pardon me?
It was 2017.
That's when it was completed, but wasn't it started earlier? It was completed in a year. Thank you. I am very, very concerned about how we evaluate something like this. It's so aspirational and paints with such a very, very broad brush that I don't know how we evaluate it. That doesn't mean that someone else doesn't know how, but I haven't seen that. And again, in reading everything I could from the Albuquerque office, they've had a lot of meetings. I read all the reports. And I don't know that for the vast amount of money spent that they got great value for that because there's no evaluation of it. So those are my initial thoughts on this. Again, I do thank the 4 counselors that I know worked and put a lot of time in on this. It's problematic. It's based on the recommendations from Artful Life and you know, it's the recommendations came to us, and I don't know how those recommendations have been evaluated either. So just having them as recommendations and saying that, well, these are the recommendations, we should do all of this. I don't know that that's true. We haven't really had an opportunity to, I'm sure that individually we've gone through them, but we certainly haven't gone through them, the recommendations as a group or as a council. And the folks that participated in CHART, I don't know, in circling back, if they agree with the recommendations. Probably some, probably not some others. So those are my initial thoughts on it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Cassett.
Thank you so much. I just have I have a couple questions and then some comments. So just to clarify, is the Office of Equity and Inclusion, are we talking a new department, or are we talking a new, well, the problem is that we have departments within departments. Are we talking a new department within a department?
So I'm going to refer you to the language on page 7, lines 15 through 17. Be it further resolved that the city manager shall recommend the appropriate budget and placement for the Office of Equity Inclusion in the mayor's fiscal year 2024 budget and for consideration by the governing body. So all we're calling for is a proposal to create it, and we'll be having further conversations about where it's placed, how big its first budget is based on our resources and what that looks like. And that'll be part of the budgeting process. And those conversations will take there and be molded there and be voted upon there
Okay.
by the governing body.
And then I guess my other question kind of along those lines, I know some of the feedback from the community has been a little bit that this is nebulous and just wanting deeper understanding of what the OEI looks like. Would those conversations be part of those? I'm assuming that when, he's supposed to work with HR, we normally don't see job descriptions. Would we see job descriptions for this? Would we have an opportunity during those conversations to really be shaping it initially? I mean, I assume, as with all of our departments, that as we have new needs, our departments shift to meet those needs. I think we see that pretty much with any department, although the one that I really comes to mind the most would be the Community Health and Safety Department. I find that one frequently is shifting based on what the health and safety needs are of the city. But with those budgeting conversations, would those go beyond just appropriating dollars, which typically we stick to that with budgeting, but would it get a little bit more into the details of what those job descriptions look like, a bit more conversation, or is this the place to be hammering that out?
So you're right. We don't typically get involved in the human resources department's purview, and I don't see that to be different here. I do think we can. So I think what's in this resolution is a vision for what we see the Office of Equity and Inclusion to be. Will it be all of these things all at once? Probably not, because of limited resources. I think it will shift. The priorities will shift as we have money to address some things, as certain things become more important to work on. The Albuquerque Office of Equity and Inclusion, part of the reason why it's as big as it is that it has an enormous outside grant. As that office shifts to being covered more by city resources, it may not be that big. It may have to downsize a bit. And I can see this office here kind of expanding and contracting based on needs and based on resources. So I think what we've outlined here is a vision. And I think what we know from the chart report is that the things that were identified there are not things that happen overnight. They are things that are going to require a consistent effort, a consistent attention. And so that's why I think the initial sponsors thought it was important to create an office and have a place for this work that is ongoing and continuing. And I don't know if you all want to add to any of what I've said to answer the counselor's questions.
Specific to the office, I think the way we're envisioning it, sure, it may have a similar name as Albuquerque Office of Equity and Inclusion, but I think the goal from the original sponsors is to look at how we had the Office of Intercultural Affairs, which played a role that we're envisioning for this office. And I mean, there were a number of things that the Office of Intercultural Affairs worked on. They were addressing issues at that time around immigration, LGBTQ plus community issues. There were some dynamics and discussions that veterans wanted to be part of. And this was actually the office that expanded the celebration that we had called Community Days that we haven't celebrated for a while, but this was also influencing the development of the Plaza Bandstand. So they had a role, and then there's a lot more, obviously, that we need to tackle as it relates to social and racial divisions in our community. And I think you don't see immediate results of something. I mean, the Office of Equity and Inclusion in Albuquerque started, was it? I remember talking about this. So whenever the Mayor Keller came in is when they actually started it. So that's been almost,
Well, he's a
6 years.
second-term mayor, so, you know,
I think it's 6 years.
Yeah.
So, and it wasn't as large as it started. It didn't start with 11 people. It started actually very small, and it was bits and pieces of Human Rights Alliance work. So there was a lot of iterations of that, which I envision this being. I also think this office, it needs to be in its autonomous state. I don't know where that looks like. We were talking about different places it could land, but it does need to be autonomous because it does hold internal and external values and also responsibilities and accountability. And so that's how I think we were talking about its role being played and having different external facing roles. I think staff will have expertise to be able to do trainings themselves. And yes, like every single department we have in this city, we hire contractors and consultants to do a lot of our work, and external work. So I just say, and expertise, there's expertise that can come from communities. So I think there's a lot of potential. Yes, it's aspirational, but I think that's where we need to start heading. Being aspirational about the work we do, about how we look at equity across all populations, particularly with marginalized and underserved communities. And I don't know if we answered your question now that I'm thinking about it.
You have in a roundabout way. And actually, as everyone was talking, I had one of those revelations about our roles and where we as a governing body and that we are legislative. And then it really is the responsibility of the city manager to enact and to make sure that on the day-to-day our policies are being enacted. And so as I'm thinking about it, I'm realizing that as much as we probably want to really get our fingers into this, there comes a point where that is no longer our role. And so this is probably we've probably hit that line. And so
can I just add to that really quick?
absolutely.
So I think the other thing is there can be more resolutions, there can be more laws that we create to provide direction to this. And, we can do, if there's a need, I know, for instance, if Councilor Chavez was here, she's very much looking at this office, not just in terms of race and culture, but as Councilwoman Villarreal said, marginalized and underserved communities. She's looking at they're having attention towards seniors, disabled, so broad in that sense. I think we've all gotten emails from the Human Rights Alliance. I think there are things that this office can do in that direction, things they're concerned about. So and we can, as we see the need, we can create resolutions that direct the work of this in specific ways and pass budgets to see that work gets done. And again, there's an awful lot to do in this area, and it's very broad. And we're not going to be able to do it all at once. And a lot of this work is hard and is not going to happen overnight, but it needs a continuing effort, constant prioritization. And I think the sponsors felt like the only way you're going to get that concentrated, consistent effort is if you create space in city government to focus on these very broad, very complicated, very difficult issues.
Yeah, thank you. I fully agree. And this is actually, I am in full support of the establishment of this office. I think that, as you were just saying, Counselor Merriworth, that these are really complex issues. And my concern had been, gosh, how do we focus in? But again, then that's where I had that revelation of, that's not fully our job. And if we need to make it our job, we do have, as you were mentioning, vehicles to do that if there comes a point that there is something that's kind of a flashpoint that we want to make very specific. And there already are some guiding documents. And I do know that the chart report said that Culture Connects does still have a lot of, they found a lot of that to be still very relevant. It's interesting. We've had a lot of conversations about the different groups. But I was recently having this conversation with a constituent that we've been kind of dealing with a longstanding issue. And she's wonderful, very, smart, thoughtful, problem solving individual. I really enjoy my conversations with her. But she said, something along the lines of, I talk to so many people who feel like they don't belong here. And for me, that statement, again, it's so broad, and how we start to deal with that. I mean, I can't tell you where to begin, but I do think that it is really important that we start to, create some space, as you said, in city government to address that. So I'll pull back from some of my more detailed questions, and that is again the job of the city manager. And if we feel that we need to step in, we do have our vehicles to do that, and their work is pretty well cut out for them for that first year. Which takes me back to my next actual concrete question. So with the resolution, there's 1 year from the passage of the budget, which, if I'm looking at our calendar, is probably April 26th or May 10th, based on when we typically do budget hearings and when we typically pass a budget. However, the FY24 fiscal year, that's repetitive. FY24 doesn't start until July 1st. Does that mean that these individuals cannot actually start work until July 1st? So they actually have less than a year to be doing this initial tranche of work, in which case maybe we want to look at the 1 year from the start of FY24 as opposed to the passage of the budget.
Yeah, I think there are things that can happen in, let's call it, the 2 months prior to the start of the fiscal year that will need to happen in order to be ready to, go. So, we can think about that. But I think part of the reason why we have the thing in there about the Human Resources Department is, we have current staff working now that can start to say, all right, we're going to need to hire 2 people or 1.5 people, and this is what we're going to need. And we can also start to think about, all right, how do you write an RFP for the people we need to be hiring to redesign, reframe, rebuild the obelisk. Maybe some of that brainstorming can happen ahead of time. I don't know. I think we can float this out there and get some feedback on the timeline. It is rather aggressive, but I think it's also, there's some impatience in that time frame. We need to start some action here. I think it also sets some parameters about, how much longer we're going to go on talking, and it does create some urgency in starting to get some progress made, some real action steps taken. And so, yeah, it's aggressive, but I think the time frame is also appropriate in a lot of ways.
And I think that, it, to our previous conversation, it probably does help sharpen the focus, because I could see a scenario where this office is established and there's so much to do that doing a lot of things, halfway as opposed to a few things really well. And so that timeline could probably also help with that. Regarding the plaques, it's pretty prescriptive in this resolution, and I think that I personally find the balance of these plaques to be a very good representation of the different viewpoints, as well as recognizing both our history that that initially brought the obelisk to the plaza, as well as our recent history, which I know that there have been individuals that there's some concern around talking about the destruction of the obelisk. Although, it's kind of hard to know when you're living in history, although recently we seem to really be doing that. But I think this is one of those moments where we are really living in history. And so it is important to recognize that. However, we're putting in this language, if the amendment passed, of after consulting with interested stakeholders. Is there a scenario with one of these plaques that, interested stakeholders are really against it, that we have the opportunity to go ahead and change that? Is that contemplated, or is it really, again, part of this, how do we give focus to this project? And I see that it says at least 4, so that means that there potentially could be more placed somewhere in there. Am I understanding all these items correctly?
So yeah, it does say at least 4 plaques. I had a very interesting meeting with a gentleman who has a post office box over here at the main post office, who walks through the plaza on a consistent basis and has been doing so for 30, 40 years. And he had a very interesting idea about the fact that maybe if you place the plaques not on the obelisk, but if you place them around the oblong shape, there are actually 8 sides, the concrete that surrounds it, you might give yourself a different viewing experience. And so again, it could be that there are more plaques because of the design that comes back and how easily it is to read what is the information that's being provided. It could be that we, as this process moves along, there's something else, there's another concept that should be covered that nobody has thought about yet and could be included. So I think that there's some flexibility in that language for either the way it's displayed or the content of what is brought back to the governing body for approval. I think right now, what was the first part of your question about the individual plaques?
Essentially, if, with the passing of this resolution, is that these 4 topics are set and we need to see exactly for these, 4 topics, which doesn't really leave room for, like, if stakeholders have a different idea or very much against one of these pieces.
There's also the technology piece that goes along with these plaques, where maybe if someone feels like their story was left out, they have the ability to use this modern technology to maybe tell their story or tell a different version of the story. So it gives opportunity, I think, to everyone, whether their exact story or how they remember it or realize it is on the plaque or not, they have the ability to interact.
If I can just add, that's a great point in terms of capturing more perspectives. I do think there is a constituency out there that would like the obelisk to tell the story of the obelisk as the soldier's monument. I can't see that not happening. I think, at least some preliminary conversations suggest that there are people interested in developing an indigenous land acknowledgement. I can't see that not happening. The Entrada proclamation is already there. And actually, I think we are going to be attaching that to, and I'll just give direction to the city attorney's office. We were going to consider whether to include that in the packet or as part of the resolution itself. We have not done that yet. So that's on our to-do list so that people can see exactly what it does say. I think the fourth plaque, it again is a commitment to healing and reconciliation and to better understanding of our diversity. I don't know why we wouldn't. I mean, that's the whole point of this exercise, is to pledge a commitment to healing and reconciliation, to better understanding of our diversity, to a more inclusive representation and telling of our complex multicultural history and cultural perspectives. I don't know anybody who would say we shouldn't do that. So I guess I don't see that any of these plaques are ones that I can't imagine at this moment a reason why we wouldn't go forward with at least the four things that are contemplated here.
Thank you. Yeah, and as I said, I think that these four plaques actually really do capture and are very well balanced. Councilor Rivera, were you referring to the QR code?
Yes.
And can you go into a little bit more detail about, so it says where the public may access more information and learn about the varied perspectives about the community's complex history. Oh, and contribute their own perspectives. I apologize. I missed that part of contributing. Interesting. I really like that. As I'm looking at that now.
We did think about this a little bit.
And just a smidge, I know.
We did have a few meetings where we
Yeah.
knocked this around a bit.
Last question. So, with the changes now made to the part about shining the light in the sky, does this mean that essentially the box will be remaining until the obelisk is rebuilt?
So we haven't made the changes yet. We just talked about these amendments. We'll have to get a motion to adopt them. But I think we did take out the language that says that the box will be removed, that the fence will be removed. I think part of our comfort in doing that was that we do have a timeline, fairly quick timeline for wanting to see something else develop in that space. And so we were comfortable leaving the box for essentially a year. It's going to be a little more by the time you actually approve whatever the design is, and get it built. But it's not hopefully going to be 10 more years.
Thank you for that clarification. I don't have any other questions, but I do really want to thank, there's three of you here, as well as Councilor Chavez, the original sponsors. This was really not, and I mean, reaching to the choir here, but this, I recognize that this was really not an easy task. And yes, you did put a lot of work into it. And I think it really does show. What I really appreciate about the Office of Equity and Inclusion is that it does provide the vehicle for this work to continue, because there's just no way that both the chart report and Culture Connects, as well as all of the other issues that are bubbling that led to this, could possibly be addressed, and a path could be set forth at one single time with one single piece of legislation. So I really appreciate that built-in continuation. But I know that this is an area where there are a lot of competing, maybe competing isn't the correct word, but there's a lot of differing viewpoints. And some of them differ greatly. And one of the things that I have always found so challenging about, especially with the issue of the obelisk, is it's one of those that I say all things are true. So when people come and express what the obelisk represents to them, all things are true with them, because it's their opinion of what this represents in our community and what this represents about our history and what this represents about the present day. So I know that there is still a lot of consternation in the community around this. And again, this is the work of generations. And so I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the proposal that you all have put forth for how we start this in this moment. So I just really wanted to recognize the incredible work. This is one of those areas that, a lot of times with policy, it's not necessarily cut and dry, but things are just more concrete. And this is one of those areas where we're really having to step into a place where we will have missteps. There will be times when, the Office of Equity and Inclusion, maybe we're on the right path, and sometimes they're going to be on the wrong path. And this really is an area where we will have to continually navigate these really hard conversations. And we have seen also how outside forces impact what's happening in our community. The national dialogues, the national vitriol and division, it comes down into Santa Fe. The impacts of the pandemic and what that has done to a lot of people has really come down into Santa Fe. The protests in 2020. I mean, all of these pieces, sometimes there's things that of course we cannot possibly predict. Again, not being able to predict things seems to be the theme of the last 4 years of we should be ready for the unexpected. So I really appreciate this work because I know it was really not easy. So thank you all so much.
Should we adopt the amendment?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilwoman Villarreal.
One minor correction.
On the amendment?
Yeah, there was just a typo.
Okay.
Yeah, it says this the part about the Human Resources Department to stand up the Office of Equity and Inclusion, not of inclusion, That's the only thing. We could pull that in.
Hold on, I'm just
Page
I'm
7.
trying to pull, oh, I know, I'm pulling up the red line instead of and is that on the amendment or the red line? Or both?
Both.
Okay. So do you want to make a motion and change that of to on?
Do I need to do that? For one word? Okay. So we need two motions then?
I think you can.
Can I say accept, I'd move to accept the amendments.
Okay, so hold on. Let's do a main motion first, like we do at governing body. So what's the pleasure of the committee on the resolution?
Move for approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a motion and a second on approving the resolution. And then we do have an amendment in front of us that needs a change. And I think we could just move the amendment with the changing of to on, and just do it in one.
Okay. So I move to approve the amendment with the.
And I think it would be amendment A. So you capture all those changes.
Thank you. I move to approve amendment A with the adjustment to the wording of Office of Equity and Inclusion on page 7. line 24. Oh,
Okay.
that's the red
How
line,
about,
sorry.
how about I try it and use?
Okay.
So we need a motion to approve Amendment A, changing the wording of the fifth change or fifth amendment of Amendment A to say, instead of Office of Equity of Inclusion, Office of Equity and Inclusion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, can we get a roll call on the amendment?
Certainly, Madam Chair, Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, so that amendment is now on the resolution. Is there further discussion on the resolution as amended? And if not, can we get a roll call, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair, Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Rivera,
Yes.
Counselor Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Romero Worth.
Yes. All right, that
Motion
motion passes. Thank you. All right, we do not have an executive session tonight. Matters from staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have one matter from staff this evening. I wanted to announce the schedule for our upcoming FY24 budget hearings. As we've done in the past, we have scheduled these for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, beginning the second week of April from 1 to 5 p.m. Except for on the 12th and the 26th, we will end by 4 p.m. to accommodate governing body, starting at 5. So the specific dates are Tuesday, April 11th, Wednesday, April 12th, and Thursday, April 13th. Then the following week, Tuesday, April 18th, Wednesday, April 19th, and Thursday, April 20th. And then the following week, Tuesday, April 25th, Wednesday, April 26th, and Thursday, April 27th. Planning to vote on the budget on the 27th. The 25th and 26th will be overflow, so we may not need to meet on those days, but we want to make sure we have plenty of time to go through all the departments. And with that, Madam Chair, those are my announcements.
Counselor Lindell.
And you will email that to us, correct?
Certainly, absolutely,
you.
Council.
So just a couple questions though. So the 25th, 26th, and 27th are overflow dates.
The 25th and 26th we've scheduled the actual vote of the Finance Committee on the budget for the 27th. The reason that we did that was because we wanted to make sure that it was after any presentations that overflowed into the 25th or the 26th.
All right, and what happens if we don't have any presentations on the 25th and the 26th? We'll still approve, the Finance Committee will approve the budget on the 27th.
Well, Madam Chair, depending on where we're at on the 19th or 20th, we could choose to update the agenda to change the date for that final approval by the Finance Committee and move it forward. So if we're running ahead of schedule, or if, it doesn't look like we're going to need those overflow dates, we could change the agenda and change the date. We just have to make sure we do it 72 hours before. So if we wanted to move it from the 27th to the 25th, we would need to know by Friday, the 20th, or I'm sorry, 21st.
And then the vote at governing body would be the 10th.
Yes, Madam Chair, yes,
And it's due to the state on
June 1st.
June 1st. Okay, any other questions from the committee on the dates? How it works, Counselor Cassick?
I just want to make you all aware that on 4/27, Councilman Villarreal and I have MPO starting at 5 o'clock. I don't know where it'll be located as we're moving. But it's possible that we will need to be ending earlier that day in order to accommodate us driving to a new location. And then I'm assuming that on the 19th, we're just gonna butt right up to quality of life.
Madam Chair, we can make sure to take a break. We can end by
At 4 o'clock.
4 on the 19th.
Be helpful.
Okay, so you have that ending at 4 o'clock on the 12th, the 19th, and the 26th. And a possible problem on the 27th if we were to go that, if we were to adopt, if the finance committee were to vote on the final budget on that day, it would have to be like a 1 to 2, 1 to 3 meeting,
We could
right?
Go to 4. We don't start MPO till 5 o'clock.
Oh, you don't? Okay,
So it's just that we may need to change location. So
okay,
4 o'clock probably that day as well.
okay. So, yeah, any other conflicts with this?
Madam Chair, I know we have public safety on one of those Tuesdays and airport advisory on one of those Thursdays. But I think I could work with staff to make some changes or even cancel for those times.
Yeah, and I may have, I'm glad you brought that up because I may have water conservation on the 11th. Which starts at 4. So a lot of demands on our time. Okay. Yep, Counselor Cassidy.
Just as we're thinking about the scheduling, on those Tuesdays, I will absolutely have a hard stop at 5 o'clock because I will have to go get Tiny Human by 5:20. So I'll have to be jetting out of City Hall. So just as we're looking at how long budget hearings we're planning on making them last, I know oftentimes we have gone over. And I will not be able to on a number of those days.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna try to keep us moving along.
We can schedule April 18th to end at 4:30. That would be helpful because we also have a task force meeting that night.
Okay, so that's the Health and Safety Task Force on the 18th. Okay. Did you get that, Director Oster? So
Yes, thank
we
you,
may
Madam
need to
Chair.
talk about, yeah, maybe on some of these days, we need to start at 12 instead of at 1. Just so we don't run up into the evening hours when we all have other meetings. So let's you and I talk tomorrow, make sure we have all these. Yes, Counselor Cassidy.
And just on this area of budget hearings, I know one of our challenges in the past have been that we receive our budget book so late in the game. I think it would probably help all of us if we have the budget books in a timely fashion, that we actually have the opportunity to really go through them.
Funny you should mention that.
Oh, great.
Director Oster has good news on
Oh,
that.
wonderful.
We're
Madam
ahead of you on that.
Yeah, we did take that into consideration this year, and we're planning to have the budget books to you by Monday, April 3rd, which will give you a full week to review before the hearings start. In the past, I think the budget books were delivered on Saturday and then the hearings started Tuesday. And so I did hear feedback that that was really difficult. So we've built in that extra week.
Thank you. Very much appreciated.
Okay, back to our agenda. So matters from staff, matters from the committee. Yes, Counselor Rivera.
There was an answer to my question last time about the finances for the radio system, that the city manager. I don't know if he has it or what he's waiting for, or if anybody checked into it.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, I will follow up with the city manager on that tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, matters from the committee, matters from the chair. Our next meeting, Monday, March 13th, 2023. And I believe, just so you all know, hold on. March. Yeah, so in March, we only have one finance committee meeting, which was interesting. And we do already have a couple of presentations that I think will be very interesting. So just heads up on coming attractions. Thank you. We're adjourned.